Election day in South Australia, long lines and big barbecues as a hard-fought campaign comes to a head. More civilians killed in Ukraine with key cities bombarded by shelling. A Sydney woman's alleged sole carer charged with her murder. And Australian Sign Language to be taught in New South Wales schools from next year. Hello and welcome to ABC News. I'm Meredith Sheehan. Voting is underway in South Australia today with the current Premier Stephen Marshall the underdog according to the latest news poll. We've got our reporters Evelyn Manfield in Adelaide and Shari Harms in Port Pirie. Evelyn, to you first, what's happening where you are?
Well, I'm here in the seat of Adelaide, which is a marginal seat held by the Liberal Party by just 1%. And it's been a really busy day, despite, up to 80,000 people in COVID isolation in South Australia. And on top of that, lots of people choosing to vote early through postal votes or pre-polling. It's still been really busy at all the polling centres we've been to today. And of course, the barbecue here behind me is working overtime, as well as the people from the different parties handing out their how to vote cards and all the, banners in the background as well. This election here in South Australia today is set to be incredibly interesting because, as the polls show, the opposition leader Peter Malinauskas is ahead, which, if works out to be true, is bucking that trend that we've seen around the country of incumbent leaders, getting their job back because of COVID. Now, as Stephen Marshall, the current Premier, cast his vote not too long ago this morning, saying, ignore the news polls. Take a listen to him.
Last election, federal election, they said that Bill Shorten was definitely going to be the Prime Minister of Australia. It didn't work out to be that way. I did see the poll results today. I'm not fussed by them. There's an even bigger poll. It's happening as we speak.
And Evelyn, is this a result the federal government will be watching closely?
Oh, I think it's something that they'll certainly be keeping a close eye on. It's really important to note that this is the first, first leader in Australia going to face voters after the Omicron wave. And so I think both Scott Morrison and Anthony Albanese will be looking at this closely to see what happens to their state counterparts here in South Australia. We were at a polling booth before where Julie Bishop joined her local candidate there and was there sort of spruiking the message of the Liberal Party, asking people in that marginal seat to back the Liberal candidate. So it shows, I think, that, the federal government and the opposition are keeping a close eye on this election, of course. But according to Julie Bishop, she's not even considering a loss by Stephen Marshall.
I'm not contemplating Stephen Marshall losing, and there are differences, as you'll hear every politician and former politician say, between state and federal. I think the issues are different, although both elections will be based on the economy and cost of living at a federal level, how the state's going here in South Australia, and from my observation, the state's doing very well.
Shari, to you now, and you're in a closely fought seat. Why is Stuart considered one of the more interesting contests?
Hello, so I'm here at John Pirie Secondary School where there's been a steady line of voters here this morning. Now it is interesting because Port Pirie, the city, wasn't incorporated in the seat of Stuart, but with electoral boundary changes, voters will now be voting for Stuart. And half of Port Augusta, which has pinned Deputy Premier Dan Van Hulst-Pellekaan against very popular MP Jeff Brock. Now, Dan Van Hulst-Pellekaan holds the marginal seat by around 11%. And in last election, Jeff Brock won around 70 to 80% of Port Pirie voters. So a very tight competition here.
Yes, Port Pirie has a history of deciding which party forms government. Is that a possibility again?
Yeah, so famously in 2014, Jeff Brock shared a pizza with Labor Premier Jay Weatherill at the time, and some say that swayed him to create a minority government. So if there is a hung parliament and MP Jeff Brock is elected, there is the chance that he may have to decide who forms state government.
So that was Shari Harms in Port Pirie and Evelyn Manfield in Adelaide reporting there. And we'll check in with our reporters on the ground in Adelaide and Port Pirie shortly. We'll also have comprehensive coverage of the South Australian election from 6 o'clock Australian Central Daylight Time, which is 6:30 Australian Eastern Daylight Time, right here on the News Channel and on ABC iView. The war in Ukraine is spreading westwards after an airstrike near the city of Lviv. Russian missiles struck an aircraft maintenance facility on the city's outskirts yesterday, raising concerns that the city, which has been a safe haven for refugees, could be targeted further. Fighting has also reached the centre of Mariupol, where 130 people are reported to have been rescued from the basement of a bombed theatre. Tens of thousands of civilians are still trapped in the city without food after multiple evacuation efforts failed. And in the capital, Kyiv, one person has been killed and 4 others wounded after parts of a Russian missile crashed into a residential building. The United Nations says at least 816 civilians in Ukraine have been killed and 1,333 have been wounded since Russia first invaded. In Ukraine, every part of life has been disrupted and changed for the newborn to the elderly.
Behind the statistics of damage and destruction are addresses like Kotelnikova 80 in Kiev. And people like Olena. She's here to see what can be salvaged from the wreckage of her daughter's tiny flat in a block that was badly damaged 3 days ago. Look, she says, a fragment of a rocket. Luckily, everyone was safe in the shelter. And in the kitchen, Elena says the fridge, the microwave, the extractor, it's all gone. And there's another piece of rocket in the ceiling. Even the shopping was burned. My daughter and her husband are newlyweds. We'll get through this.
It's bad, very bad. The Russians are supposed to be our closest people. We never expected they could do this to us. We never wanted a war.
The neighbour, Mikola, came to fix the door the firefighters kicked in. He's been arguing on the phone with his wife's cousin in St. Petersburg, who he's known for 50 years. He told me, you've been killing Russians. We did nothing. Our Putin is a king and a god. I told him a person like that should be in a mental hospital. How could you Russians let him be president for so long? So I said we should probably end this conversation. In the other burnt flats in Kotelnikova 80, more fragmented lives. People who survived the attack, but lost everything that was certain. It is obvious that a young family lived here. War is made up of thousands of incidents like this, not even necessarily involving loss of life, but destroying homes, wrecking everything, personal tragedies, and afterwards, nothing is ever the same. In the basement of Kyiv Maternity Hospital number 3, they're doing their best to make it better, but it's hard. A baby born to a surrogate mother was being picked up by a doctor dressed to protect. We're strong, said the woman in Ukrainian who'd carried the baby. Her friend who'd done the same for another couple agreed in Russian. They wanted their identities hidden before traveling back together to the war zones in the east. The doctor took the baby girl, whose parents are German, to a safe place we agreed not to identify. Paid surrogacy is legal here, but biological parents have to brave the war zone to reach their new babies. 20 new babies are being looked after in a clean and warm basement. They're waiting for parents who've got to come a long way, Brazil and China, as well as from Europe. They're short-staffed. The nurses don't get time off. We try to love them as if they were ours until their mothers and fathers can get here, said Antonina.
We just used to teach the parents to look after the babies. Now it's completely different. We take care of them.
And they were doing that. loving care for strangers' babies in a war zone. But what a way to begin a life. The doctors in combat gear went out to collect another newborn.
US President Joe Biden and China's President Xi Jinping have spoken for the first time over the crisis in Ukraine. During a 2-hour video call, Mr Biden called on China to take a stand against the invasion. Jade McMillan has more from Washington.
Well, Joe Biden and Xi Jinping spoke for nearly 2 hours. The majority of that time, we're told, was spent on the situation in Ukraine. The US warned earlier this week that China could be considering providing military equipment to Russia to use in Ukraine. There was also concern that Beijing could help Russia to evade some of the major economic sanctions that Western nations have imposed in response to the invasion. And in this call today, the White House says that Joe Biden laid out in detail what it's calling the implications and consequences for providing such support. Now, it's not providing any detail publicly at this stage as to what those consequences would involve. It's also not prepared to say what the trigger point would be, what support China would need to provide Russia before these actions, these warnings were acted upon. But it insists that that message has been made very clear to Xi Jinping. I spoke to Derek Chollet, an official with the US State Department, earlier today. He says that China really has an obligation, a responsibility here to use its relationship with Russia to try to bring the war to an end.
And that responsibility means any influence that they may have with Moscow, they should be using to get Moscow to de-escalate and end this war. But moreover, if China does not live up to those responsibilities, if in fact it is supporting Russia either economically or militarily, we've been very clear to the Chinese leadership that there will be consequences for those actions. And that's what President Biden spoke to the Chinese president about today.
Well, China's summary of that phone call was released, according to the US, before the conversation had even wrapped up. It says that Xi Jinping wants to see this conflict come to an end as soon as possible, that China never wanted to see it come to this. But the statement is still stopping short of publicly condemning Russia's actions. The US has grown increasingly concerned about the relationship between China and Russia. Vladimir Putin and Xi Jinping released a lengthy joint statement after meeting at the Beijing Winter Olympics, declaring that there were no limits to their friendship. So the White House says that both the US and the world will be closely watching what China does next.
The UK announced a new round of sanctions against Russia this week, with over 1,000 individuals and entities now being punished. Among those sanctioned is Chelsea FC owner Roman Abramovich. Last month, Labor MP Chris Bryant revealed that the Home Office had identified the oligarch as someone who had links to the Russian state and to corrupt activities and practices in 2019. Europe correspondent Steve Kinane spoke with him in the wake of the sanctions.
Well, finally, it's great that we seem to be we've got into second gear, but there's an awful lot more people that we need to tackle, because it's kind of easy to do the people who've got £20 million houses. Everybody knows about them. The thing that might make a real difference to the political situation in Russia, which is what we need to change, is the kind of 2,000 or 3,000 people who are fairly wealthy. They've managed to squirrel away enough money to buy like a £500,000, £700,000 flat in London. They think of that as their bolt hole if everything goes wrong in Russia. Those are the people we need to be going after as well. And my anxiety about the way that the UK has done it is that, yes, we can freeze assets, but we can't seize them. And that is a long-term problem for things like Chelsea Football Club, where, in the interest of the fans, I'd like the club to be able to remain, but obviously no money can go back to Abramovich. So it will be much better if the government could seize it, sell it, and then give the money from that to the Ukrainian refugee or Ukrainian reconstruction.
Why can't the British government seize assets here?
Well, normally, you don't want your government to be able to seize assets willy-nilly. You want a proper legal process. And I think that this is like a wartime situation because it's definitely an illegal and barbaric war in Ukraine. So we need to have wartime solutions to this particular problem. And it affects the UK more than many other places simply because we have a strong banking system. We have very high value residential and commercial properties, which constantly appreciate. We've got all the schools, the luxury shops, the football clubs and so on that you could want. And that has meant that a lot of Russians have based themselves or based some of their assets here in the UK. I think there are some people in Britain, and in particular in the Conservative Party, who've just wanted, they've seen dollar signs or ruble signs or pound signs or whatever, and no questions asked. And I think too many people were just blinded by the bling.
What impact has that had on Britain, do you think?
I think it has undermined our reputation around the world for clean money. It's infected the City of London with a lot of dirty money. It's had a terrible effect on the London housing market because of gross inflation, and it's produced hyperinflation in football as well, because basically Chelsea was able to buy the best players around the world. That was how they won their matches, but it made all the other football clubs in England do exactly the same.
A man has been charged with murder after the body of a woman was found at a home in Sydney's southwest. Paramedics were called to a home in Greenacre yesterday, responding to reports of a medical episode. They alerted police after the body of a severely emaciated 60-year-old woman was found. An 82-year-old man who is alleged to have been the woman's sole carer has been arrested. The Greenacre man was held in custody and is expected to face Parramatta Court on Saturday. Travel agents and tour operators struggling to process credits for pandemic-affected travellers will soon receive more than $75 million in targeted federal funding. The pandemic has hit the tourism industry particularly hard, with many businesses forced to close as domestic and international border closures kept tourists out. The government is hoping the funding will help operators get back on their feet. Cost of living pressures are being felt by many across the country. Fuel, groceries, housing are all on the rise. The record jump in petrol prices this week to about $2.20 a litre in some parts has cut even deeper into family budgets and placed cost of living firmly on the national agenda. With the looming federal election, the government came under intense pressure this week to address the issue. Yesterday, the Treasurer announced some reprieve is on the way in the upcoming budget. Low to middle income Australians will be offered one-off payments, but that likely won't be enough though to ease the squeeze on households. A growing number of Australians are struggling to make ends meet, and housing affordability is shaping up to be a major election issue. Housing costs account for more than 30% of the weekly budget for people on low incomes in this country, and more than 50% for some. Around 1 million low-income households were in financial housing stress in recent government data. And there are estimates that 1.5 million households with a mortgage are currently in financial stress. That's 42%. But it's those who rent who are especially bearing the brunt. Places to live are becoming harder to find and more expensive in what's becoming a national rental crisis. Capital City asking rents soared 9.4% over the year to March, according to property market monitor SQM Research. National rental vacancies have dropped to a 16-year low. A combination of increased demand and low vacancies is pricing many out of the market. Strong winds are fueling multiple wildfires in the US state of Texas, forcing the evacuation of hundreds of homes. Several fires have merged to form what authorities are calling a complex, about 200 kilometres west of Dallas. At least 475 homes have been evacuated, with reports some have been destroyed. The Forest Service is warning that rare high-impact wildfire phenomenon could see further damage in neighbouring states. Australia's most widely used sign language, Auslan, will soon be available as a subject at schools across New South Wales. Ruby Cornish reports.
Today, the New South Wales government has announced that from next year, the language Auslan, which is the main sign language used here in Australia, will be made available as an option to schools across the state from kindergarten all the way up to year 10. And this opportunity will be made available to students who are deaf and hard of hearing and may already use some Auslan, as well as hearing students who may not have had any exposure to Auslan or the deaf community before. Now, I'm here at South Strathfield High School and I've been talking to some students who already know a little bit of Auslan about how they feel knowing that this language will be made available to their peers across the state from next year.
It's good to learn new Auslan because when you meet some people who have hearing loss and then you learn the Auslan, you can sign and then they can understand.
It's a good idea because we need more people to learn Auslan, so we can all communicate to each other. And I think they'll be very interested actually.
I like to learn a lot of things like numbers, letters, and communicate with other people who knows how to sign.
This announcement means that students who are deaf and hard of hearing who may have been studying Auslan in a more informal setting, so at home or in the classroom or at school as part of a social club, will now be able to learn it under a more formal framework like other LOTE languages in New South Wales. And of course, this really comes in the midst of a spike in interest in the Auslan language and awareness of the deaf community as we see more interpreters on our screen during news conferences and as more adults than ever are enrolling to study Auslan at TAFE and other educational institutions.
Special celebrations are being held on Sydney's Harbour Bridge to mark its 90th anniversary today. On this day in 1932, the bridge was opened to the public at the height of the Great Depression. A special vintage motorcade and train carriage dating back to the era has crossed the bridge to mark the occasion. Sydney siders are also being treated to free rides on a vintage double-decker buses from the 1930s to the 1970s to honour the bridge's anniversary.
Today we get the opportunity to say to everybody who worked on it, Dr. John Bradfield, the maintenance workers, those who've painted it, those who've driven across it, everybody that has ever used the Harbour Bridge today can celebrate and pat themselves on the back for a great job as we see this beautiful landmark known around the world as a symbol of Sydney celebrate her 90 years. She's worked tirelessly for us every single day since 1932, and today we have the chance to celebrate and honour the incredible work she's done.
NASA has just rolled out its Space Launch System rocket, the first of the Artemis 1 project. The spacecraft is set to take its first unmanned test flight for lunar exploration in May. The next two phases of the program will focus on getting astronauts into lunar orbit and then onto the moon.
About a 30-day mission around the moon. It'll go further than any other American or human spacecraft. And then that having tested successfully in 2 years, we'll have the first crew and they will orbit the moon and come back. And number 3 is going to be the human crew that will get into the lander in lunar orbit and go down to the surface.
Now for sport, here's Daniela Intili.
In the NRL, the Sydney Roosters have bounced back from their round 1 loss with an impressive 26-12 win over Manly at the SCG. Young Roosters 5'8" Sam Walker set up Drew Hutchinson for the opening try. The 19-year-old also kicked 3 conversions. The Roosters led 22-0 at half-time. Nat Butcher scored a double for the Tricolours. Manly remains winless after 2 rounds. Defending Premier Penrith withstood a second-half fight back from the Dragons to continue its winning start to the season. The Panthers won 20-16 at Cogra. Fiji's second rower Vilamai Le Kikau scored a double for Penrith in his 100th match. Collingwood has begun its new era under Craig McRae with a 17-point win over St Kilda in the AFL's opening round at Docklands. The Pies won 15-12-102 to 12-13-85. Star draftee Nick Dacos made an impressive debut with 27 disposals. Dacos played alongside his brother Josh, who snapped a ripping goal. Still side bottom, Patrick Lipinski and Jeremy Howe also impressed for the Pies. St Kilda debutant Jack Hayes had 18 disposals and 3 goals. The Brumbies remain undefeated through 5 rounds of Super Rugby with a hard-fought 16-12 victory over the Queensland Reds at Canberra Stadium. It was a bruising affair between the top 2 Australian sides. James O'Connor put the Reds in front before Tom Wright replied to put the Brumbies up 10-7 after the break. Queensland scored the only try of the second half, but the Brumbies extended the lead to 4 with a penalty goal and held on for the win. The Newcastle Jets have thrashed Wellington Phoenix 4-0 in the A-League men's competition in Newcastle last night. All 4 goals were scored in the second half, with Olivier Boumel scoring twice. The result ends a 3-game losing run and moves the Jets to within a win of the top 6. In women's basketball, Perth defeated Townsville by 7 points at the Townsville Entertainment Centre. Perth trailed at the first break but was too strong for the Fire as the Lynx recorded an impressive away win. Perth's Marina Maybury was the game's top scorer with 20 points. The 75-68 victory returns the Lynx to the top of the WNBL table. And for more sports news and analysis, check out abc.net.au/sport.
Let's take a look at the weather around the country today. Queensland showers in the southeast with easing showers in the northeast and mostly sunny and hot in the west. Showers right across the east of New South Wales but sunny in the west and a cloudy day in the ACT. In Victoria, showers are clearing in the southeast, mostly sunny and warm elsewhere. Fog will be clearing throughout the day in Tasmania with mostly sunny skies in the north. A sunny day is expected across South Australia. For Western Australia, showers in the south with isolated storms in the north and clearing showers in the southwest. In the Northern Territory, mostly cloudy and warm over the interior with late showers in the northwest. And looking ahead to tomorrow's forecast, Brisbane partly cloudy with a slight chance of rain, showers for Sydney and cloudy for Canberra, mostly sunny in Melbourne, partly cloudy in Hobart, mostly sunny and hot for Adelaide, a chance of rain in Perth and hot with a high of 35 in Darwin. To beat the best, you need to bleat the best. The National Sheepdog Trail Championships is underway in Canberra with the top dog to be awarded today. More than 1,000 competitors and spectators from all over the country have travelled to the capital for the sheer spectacle. It has been held since 1943, making this year's show its 79th in a row. And that's the latest from ABC News. I'm Meredith Sheehan. Thanks for joining us.
This town has